All right, so our next stop is looking at sequencing. How do we get from point A to point B? So when we talk about sequencing, we're talking about how do you put the events of a classroom or the events of a lesson in order to lead the students from the unknown to the known. So the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to have you pause the video when I say pause, and I want you to look at the list that I'm about to show. It's all out of order, and I want you to look at it, and I want you to try and put these terms in order. So in the order, I want you to think about providing principles and theories, practice, require mastery of one step before moving to the next, lead the student to observe by hearing and imitating. Notice there's another practice in there. Teach sound before sign, combine concepts, teach one concept at a time. And so what I want you to do is I want you to logically try and put these in place. Press pause now. All right. So now that you've got a pretty good idea of how you want these to be in order, now we're going to reveal the order and I'm going to kind of walk through the process. Okay, so here is the sequence of teaching. Number one, we teach sound before sign. Think about this in the way that babies begin to talk. Okay, the best analogy that I can think of is it's almost like learning a new language. We don't walk up to a 6-month-old and say, can you read this, and put Charles Dickens in front of them. They're going to look at it and they're going to chew the paper because they don't know what a book is. They don't know how to read. They don't, all of that is confounding to them. Okay. It's very similar to when we work with beginners and we say, here's a piece of music. Why can't you read it? Well, that's because we have to help them develop meaning first and then bring meaning to what they're seeing rather than trying to extract meaning from what they're seeing. So if they have a knowledge of what something sounds like and then they see it, they're going to be able to recall it much quicker. Okay, so let me go back just a little bit. Think about how babies learn to speak. They don't come out of the womb going, hey, I really want a cheeseburger. They're gaga, goo goo, ba ba, boo boo, and they're really what we call nonsense syllables. They're babbling. Okay, so they babble quite a bit. Eventually, they begin to mimic what they're hearing. Okay, which is a really strong case for modeling. Okay, so if you're a conductor of a young developing ensemble, whether that's a beginning ensemble, a middle school ensemble, or even a high school ensemble, I would argue that even at the high school level, that these ensembles need modeling much more um, than what they're currently receiving. So if we know that a model has to be there, the babies are imitating what they're hearing. And then eventually they learn what the mouth shape is and then how to make the different sounds, and they vary pitch, and they figure out that they end questions higher and statements lower, and they try all of these things out. Eventually they start making sounds that kind of make sense. They might say dada. Well, they're saying dada, but they're pointing at their sister, which means we haven't really connected the meaning yet, but we're starting to form words. Okay. It's very similar when you're learning music, that you begin to be able to sing the melodies, but you may not necessarily know what the note names are, or you might not know the rhythms that you're singing. You just know that you're really, really close. Okay. Then all of a sudden we start to say, oh, well, let's put it in this order. We're going to call this a scale. And then you sing it. Notice we haven't put anything in front of them yet. So we're building the oral vocabulary as we go through learning a new language. It's the exact same way with music. We have to develop that oral vocabulary slowly and then introduce music. Now we can go faster than what it takes a young toddler to learn to speak, but that's the same idea. And consider then when we add those, add the music in, then it's similar to adding flashcards. What letter is this? That's an A. What does it sound like? A or A. Excellent. So then what's this word? It's dad. Okay, well, how do you know that? Well, I normally have a picture there that's got a picture of dad and it says DAD, dad, dad. And they're able to make those connections. And then we see dad run and we put them together in small chunks and then we go into elaborate sentences. Okay, so that's essentially what we do with reading. And that's what we mean by teach sound before sign. So when you're thinking about this musical task that you're going to write a lesson plan for, you've got to figure out how are you going to bring in some sound before sign? How are you going to warm up the brain before you actually teach the concept you want to teach? Lead the student to observe by hearing and imitating. This is a lot of what I was talking about earlier in terms of modeling. You have to set the precedent. You set the model for them. They imitate, they listen, they hear, and they imitate what they hear back. Okay? And then you make those decisions on whether to move forward or whether to work on a concept just a little bit. Teach one concept at a time. Don't try and teach multiple things at one time. It is very difficult for younger students, and I would argue to some extent high school students, to multitask. Yes, they might be able to do several things at one time, but their mind can only focus on one. They might be able to do this over here, but their mind is solely focused on this topic. So we need to make sure that we might be working some of these other concepts, but that's just at a practice level. We're not wanting to bring their brain to it so that you can say, okay, this time I want you to focus on this. So for instance, in the music classroom, it might be something along the lines of, I want you to focus this time on measures 21 to 22. What do you hear that's just a little bit out of place? They're still going to play everything the way they have been playing it. They're going to be thinking about breath control, pulse, ensemble pulse, right rhythms, right notes. But what I want them listening for is intonation. So now I'm going to say, listen to intonation right here. What can we do to make that better? Now, all of a sudden, I'm focusing on one concept. They're working a bunch of different concepts, but they're focused on that one. And that's an important element of sequencing and teaching. Require mastery of one step before moving to the next. Remember, when we put this all in order, we want to make sure, the first things that we look for are breathing. We want to make sure breathing and pulse are locked in. Okay. Once those concepts are locked in, then we can begin talking about getting tone locked in. Okay. And note shape. And then we can begin talking about style and articulation. And then we get to musicality. Okay. But if we try and work on musicality, so phrasing and dynamics and how one phrase interconnects with another, and we don't address the fundamentals, the breathing, the tone production, the pulse, the ensemble pulse, if we don't address that first, and we don't make sure that they have that solid, it doesn't matter what you do, that musicality is not going to work. Here's a case in point. How many of you have been in a rehearsal where the director goes, I don't understand. We taught this yesterday. How do you not remember? Well, the reason that it's different from the day before is because they didn't focus on the fundamentals. And that there's something wrong in the fundamentals that we are not addressing solely. So that means we've got to go back to the ground level and make sure that we master the first step before we get to step 6. We've got to master steps 1 through 5. If we don't master steps 1 through 5, we are not going to be able to repeat what we're doing at level 6. And that's why this level is important. Require mastery of one step before moving to the next. And then we're going to practice it. We're going to rep it. We want to do it over and over and over and over and over again. Okay? So once we master a step, we want to rep it, make sure that it becomes second nature. And then we move on to the second, and we master it, and we practice it. Okay? But that is the process by which we approach the classroom. Then we begin to combine concepts. Once we've mastered two concepts, all right, now let's put these two together. And we're going to call this X. And so we call it something new, but it's actually a synthesis or a combination of multiple concepts at one time. And we might call it musicality. And here we're looking at dynamics, we're looking at phrasing, and we're merging those two together, and we're going to call it musicality. Or we might say tone and articulation, or note shape and articulation. We're going to call that style. So tone, articulation, and maybe a little bit of note shape. And we say, all right, that's style. Now all of a sudden we're combining concepts. That's what we mean by combining concepts. Then once we do that, we practice it. We do the same thing, and we practice it again, and we keep practicing. And then after all of this is where we begin to now bring in the principles of theories after practice, okay? So keep in mind, we teach sound before sign. We observe by hearing and imitating. Then where we introduce music is typically going to be about the time where we say teach one concept at a time. Or it could either be there, or depending on the age of the students, it might be in combined concepts. So in one stream, you're teaching them how to count, how to perform, how to sing in tune, scales, all of that. You're doing that on the physical side. And then on the mental side over here, you're teaching them how to read music, how to read rhythms and note names and fingerings and all of that, and what it all looks like. And then we combine concepts and it becomes music reading. Okay, so this works on several different levels. Okay, and then and only then is where we begin to talk about, okay, this is what it's called, and this is why it's called that. Because if we try and start at the bottom and work backwards, then we start trying to extract meaning from what we see because we think it's beyond what we're able to do, rather than saying, oh, that's what that looks like, and then go right back into it. So this is the sequence that I want you thinking about. Write this down, lock it in, remember it. It's much like the 3 parts of the objective writing. I want you to keep this in the back of your mind and think about how your lessons are designed around this process. Think about how your practicing is designed around this process. Are you using this sequence? And if not, could using this sequence help you in the practice room? Just food for thought. So now it's your turn, okay? I want you to take a musical task included in one of your objectives that you wrote for the discussion board last week, okay? And then I want you to take that objective, and I want you to take the feedback from your colleagues that you got on the discussion board, and I want you to revise it, okay? And I want you to have a refined objective. And then using that objective as your goal is I want you to sketch out an activity or a sequence of activities that you would help your students reach that goal. And you can do this whenever you're writing your objectives. You could have written it for high school ensemble, beginning choir, beginning orchestra, beginning band. You could have written it for 4th grade general music. It's totally up to you. It could be recorder. Any of that's fine. I want you focused on writing an objective and putting together some activities that would help them meet that objective. And then I want you to describe the process by which you'll teach that concept or tasks using the sequence we just outlined, okay? And right now, these are just notes. We're going to refine this down a little bit later, but I want you keeping that on the forefront. Okay, I'm going to include videos on Canvas, and so you can use those as a guide. I'm also going to put up some of my very detailed lesson plans so that you can kind of see what a sequence looks like, and that you can begin to model yours after that and think through the process. And then next time, we're going to be looking at both the assessment and putting all of this together in one lesson plan format and what that looks like and what that process is. All right, great work so far. Look forward to seeing you all next week when we talk about assessment and eventually putting full lesson plans together. Great work, and we'll see you next week.